In 2010, the decades-long project of restoring Bratislava Castle in the Slovakian capital was finally completed. It has since become a symbol of national unity and the ability of the Slovakian people to transcend adversity.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Heyman.
I'm Catherine Wright.
I'm Melanie Zuckerman.
I'm Kara Kripnikov-Salkin.
And I am Joseph Redmond. And we believe investing in the fight against unemployment, both in Slovakia and throughout the Eurozone, is the first step in overcoming other lingering challenges, both the distant and recent past.
Growth in the Eurozone is accelerating, but only at a nominal rate. However, the gross domestic product of the 19-country single-currency bloc is expanding much faster than that of the EU as a whole, which is expanding by 0.3%. In their January economic forecast, the European Commission said that the Eurozone's recovery will gain speed in 2017, expanding at 1.9%.
Unfortunately, the Eurozone average is below the 3% benchmark for advanced economies, but this disguises considerable differences between growth in member states of the EU.
Growth remains uneven, with Ireland leading the pack at 2.7% in 2016, and their largest economy, Germany, just above their overall average at 0.3%. Greece remains the exception, whose GDP is expected to drop by 0.7%.
Commission Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis explained the competing causes of moderate growth, including, quote, increasing headwinds, weakened global trade, and geopolitical tensions in Europe's neighborhood.
Specifically, low oil prices, cheap credit, and the weak euro continue to boost Eurozone growth. But this will be offset by a disorderly adjustment in China and the possibility of higher interest rates in the United States.
Fortunately, prices have been relatively stable, but lower than an optimal rate to encourage firms to hire. Inflation hasn't been near the ECB's goal of just under 2% in almost 3 years.
Last week, the European Central Bank revised the current harmonized indices of consumer prices to a flat 0%, as compared to 0.7% in early 2016. Low-cost oil have suppressed these consumer prices and pushed the rate back to zero. Because of this, the ECB met just last month to revise their monetary policy and are planning to do the same this Thursday.
The Commission sees consumer prices growing by 1.5% in 2017. And just last month, the ECB responded with plans to expand its bond buying program from 60 to 80 billion euros per month.
Last month, the ECB also decided to implement a negative 0.4% interest rate to resist deflationary pressures for up to 4 years. Hopefully, this moderate tax on savings will get money off the sidelines, creating more hiring, but early signs show that it may lead to capital flight to destinations like Indonesia.
Employment across the 19-country Eurozone rose in December for the 15th month running to its highest level in more than 4 years. That's an encouraging trend.
True, but according to Eurostat, the region's jobless rate only decreased to 10.1% from last November's 10.5%. That's still double the rate considered healthy for advanced economies.
According to the median estimate in a Bloomberg survey, economists forecast the rate to remain unchanged, showing there is more work to do to get Europe working again. Literally.
Slovakia's unemployment rate is currently 10.1%. Slovakia also suffers high household debt and slow growth, both of which are exacerbated by joblessness. If more Slovaks brought home paychecks, there would be more income to tax and less demand for social services, relieving pressure on national budgets.
When employment rises, investment and consumption increase, bringing up two key metrics of GDP. This enables the government to pay down more debts and provide more services, which helps to break the vicious cycle of unemployment.
Slovakia is a nation with underutilized advantages, including low unit labor costs, low corporate taxes, and a good geographical location. Low unit labor costs make Slovakia an attractive option for foreign automotive manufacturers.
Like all of Europe, the Great Recession hurt the Slovak Republic. In 2009, the GDP dropped down to negative 7.6% from positive 0.75%. The unemployment rate also rose from 9.6% in January 2009 to 14.9% in March 2010.
While unemployment is a persistent and urgent problem in Slovakia, it should be noted that their people and government have defied expectations time and time again since they emancipated themselves from the prison of the Warsaw Pact.
The fact that Slovakia managed to cut ties with both Russia and the Czechs without crisis speaks to the resilience and resourcefulness of their people and leaders. They also managed to be the second Eastern Bloc state to gain accession into the EU and Eurozone. And in the past 11 years since joining the EU, the size of their economy has nearly doubled.
Despite their heroic past, Slovakians are not content, as proven by the recent election of increasingly radical parties. Leaders must learn to make optimal use of their recently gained political and economic freedoms.
Just as Slovakia rebuilt the Bratislava Castle, they must also reform their labor market by addressing the 3 types of unemployment: frictional, cyclical, and structural. Frictional unemployment is always present in the labor market, so it's difficult to remediate, but cyclical and especially structural unemployment can be tackled. Their current conditions in Slovakia are textbook examples of both.
And the reason for this distinction is that each has different causes and they require different policy remedies. When looking at the data, you discover that there are a variety of primarily cyclical and structural problems that keep 10.1% of working-age Slovakians from employment.
According to the Financial Policy Institute, the number one contributor to slow growth in Slovakia is unemployment, where about 60% of the unemployed are low-skilled and almost 70% are long-term unemployed, both measures being amongst the worst in the EU.
Anyone who is serious about reducing joblessness in Slovakia needs to take a tough approach to structural unemployment, the mismatch between the skills of the Slovaks and today's jobs. Reforms need to be made in first, the tax and welfare systems, second, Romani exclusion from the labor force, and third, youth unemployment.
Long-term unemployment results from the insufficient structure of the Slovak tax and welfare systems. Unemployed Slovaks are often deterred from taking low-paying jobs due to the fact that the current tax and welfare systems cause working Slovaks to earn only marginally more than the unemployed.
Under the current system, Slovak social benefits are quickly reduced, with 75 cents of social assistance being taken away for every euro they earn. Additionally, a worker must pay 2/3 of their social and health contribution costs, accounting for around 14% of their wages. This, on top of high tax rates that can exceed 60% of the already low salary, makes unemployed Slovaks unlikely to take low-pay job opportunities.
Slovakia must also reform their healthcare system, so low-income workers don't have to pay as much for their benefits. The Institute of Economic and Social Reforms of Slovakia suggests a plan similar to a progressive tax system, where low-income workers pay less and high-income workers pay more, encouraging Slovak workers with low-pay salaries to take more jobs.
The ratio of the average to the lowest wage in different regions varies from 28 to 60%. This serves as a barrier to job creation in the areas that need it most. A decrease of minimum wages in certain regions could further contribute to lowering Slovakia's unemployment.
By the end of 2015, Slovakia succeeded in matching the Eurozone average for unemployment. They lowered the maximum personal income tax to 25% and corporate tax to 22%, making it easier for businesses to hire.
However, progress still needs to be made in other areas of taxation. As of late 2013, the Business Alliance of Slovakia found that 72% of employers consider high payroll taxes as the largest barrier to hiring new workers. A decrease in this payroll tax could give businesses in Slovakia the necessary encouragement to begin hiring more.
Additional reforms in the Ministry of Finance to cut down on tax fraud could help the Slovak government in gaining the capital they need to pay for programs that reduce unemployment.
In Slovakia, VAT compliance rate has been decreasing since joining the EU, hitting their lowest point in 2012, where the difference between collected VAT and VAT that should have been collected was 40.1%. By cracking down on tax fraud, Slovakia can gain the fiscal resources it needs to enact our policies.
The second major structural cause for unemployment is the Romani exclusion from the Slovak labor force. The high rates of Romani unemployment are abysmal, with at least 40% unemployed.
According to UNICEF, only 20% of Roma children ever enroll in primary school, causing about 60% of the unemployed to be low-skilled, many of which are Roma. They are often segregated into under-resourced schools and 28 times more likely to be labeled as special needs.
The Slovak government must establish educational reforms to help minimize the language barrier by employing more Roma-speaking teachers and aides, as well as teaching Slovak to Roma children. Multilingual education has worked well in Belgium and Switzerland, where schools teach 2 or 3 languages to everyone.
In fact, a 2008 Geneva University study concluded that multilingualism gave the Swiss a 35 billion euro advantage, accounting for a whopping 9% of GDP. That could translate into thousands of jobs for the Slovakians.
Slovakia would also be wise to follow Spain's model of Roma integration, involving a government-funded jobs training program for Romani adults to earn the equivalent of a GED.
And this plan has been successful. In Spain, 80% of Roma children attend preschool, and according to the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, the literacy rate in the generation of Spanish Roma ages 16 to 24 is 34% higher than the literacy rate in the generation ages 45 and older.
According to the Slovakian Ministry of Finance, more Roma activity in the labor market could cause national unemployment rate to decrease by 4%, significantly aiding Slovakia reaching its target of 5%. Despite the clear fact that Roma people are the key to Slovakia's economic growth, many mainstream politicians remain in firm opposition to Roma integration.
In a recent election, neo-Nazi leader Marian Kotleba and his political party took 10% of the seats in the new national parliament. As governor, Kotleba illegally enacted a policy which made many Roma homeless by buying and demolishing their shanties. However, the courts didn't stop him.
These racist attitudes serve only to inhibit economic growth. It creates an environment which makes it nearly impossible for the Romani employment rate to increase. This is why we must enforce anti-discrimination statutes.
The third major structural issue facing both Slovakia and Europe as a whole is youth unemployment, where rates are typically double the overall rate. In Spain, youth unemployment is a staggering 45%, while in Slovakia it is 24.2%. Alarming numbers of young Europeans are becoming NEETs, people not in employment, education, or training.
The good news is that steps have been taken to decrease youth unemployment. Among the 7 flagship initiatives of the Eurozone 2020 strategy is Youth on the Move, a comprehensive set of policies to provide opportunities to study or gain work experience abroad, including advice about EU grants.
Renewing successful targeted mobility schemes like Your First Year as Job and investing in German-style apprenticeship programs can help link workers with opportunities that exist in other member states.
The next type of unemployment, cyclical, is the result of booms and busts emanating from the business cycle. For Slovakia, high unemployment is partially a consequence of contagion from the 2009 credit crisis and the Great Recession. We believe that there are important monetary and regulatory reforms that the ECB could enact to boost employment.
Despite not having caused the credit crisis, as part of the EU and Eurozone alike, Slovakia has suffered. EU economic ties make them more vulnerable to contagion, and Eurozone membership prevents a more expansionist monetary policy. So Slovakia leaving the Eurozone might be a good option for the country.
True, but a clunky word like Slovexit rolls off the tongue with about the same level of comfort Slovaks would experience should they yield to the temptations to use protectionism and inflation as the solutions to joblessness.
Precisely. It's a fool's gambit to believe that any economy can go it alone. A big reason why we don't have an inflationary race to the bottom today is because many countries have linked their monetary fates together.
Unlike 1936, the EU today has the 4 freedoms that enable Slovaks to work abroad in other EU member states, easing the burden on their government. Since membership in the EU has nearly doubled the size of the Slovakian economy, the benefits clearly outweigh the costs. It need hardly be mentioned that going back to an isolationist Soviet-style command economy is not an option.
But that doesn't mean Europe should accept the status quo. There are a number of reforms that can be enacted to make future busts both less likely and less painful.
Cyclical unemployment can be minimized by reforming the charter of the ECB to imitate the American model. The Federal Reserve Bank has a dual mandate to achieve both price stability and low unemployment, which has resulted in the American unemployment rate recovering to 5%, half of what Europe's is today. We used quantitative easing that freed up credit and boosted payrolls.
By contrast, it wasn't until January 2015 that the ECB decided to follow suit. If it had been tasked with looking to boost employment earlier, that much-needed relief would have come a lot sooner.
Exactly. Stable prices alone are cold comforts for voters when they can't get a job.
A third approach to combat cyclical unemployment is to look at reserve ratios as a method to make future credit crises less likely. Slovakia's reserve ratios are set at a mere 2% and only apply to their short-term investments, leaving them immensely vulnerable to contagion when credit becomes unexpectedly scarce.
This is not enough, considering that in 2008, reserve requirements of 11% could not prevent the failure of some American banks. Many experts suggest a number closer to 22 or 25% of total assets would be more appropriate.
Furthermore, history suggests that high reserve ratios work. Lebanon set theirs at 30%, and during the financial crisis of 2008, they were one of just 7 countries whose stock market did not lose value.
Now, we need not go as high as Lebanon all at once, but by harmonizing and increasing ratios by 1% per annum over a period of years in both Slovakia and the Eurozone as a whole, it could help all European banks protect themselves from another financial crisis and make good on the promise of protecting their people from unemployment.
Slovakia has defeated greater demons than their present struggle with unemployment, and that is why we are certain that, like the Bratislava Castle, it will rise again. Thank you, and Dakuyam.
Thank you very much. We'll start with a broad question. The European Central Bank recently made its interest rates negative. Why did the central bank do this?
The central bank presented negative interest rates because when interest rates are negative, it means that people who leave their money in banks or banks that leave their money in don't invest their money are actually losing money every day. So it's trying to incentivize them to invest it in companies, spend it on people, on hiring people, and actually trying to boost consumption.
So, for example, if I was a person who had money invested in a Slovakian bank or in any bank related to the ECB, if I saw that my value was actually decreasing every day, I would be more likely to take it out and actually do it to increase consumption, which would therefore be beneficial to the government and to the ECB as a whole.
And we're doing this so we can stimulate the economy and increase liquidity, which is what we think that Slovakia needs.
This is also a very broad question. Are the current fiscal policies of the euro area governments and the monetary policy of the ECB reinforcing one another? Why or why not?
Well, in some ways, they certainly are. When you look at certain countries that are accepting quantitative easing as it is and saying, yes, this is a good policy, and encouraging them to work, their fiscal policies to work in tandem, like looking at France or looking at Luxembourg, where things are working very well together. But then when you look at a country like Germany, where their finance minister is actually very anti-quantitative easing and is being very difficult with working with Mario Draghi to enforce quantitative easing, with those countries, it's not working so well.
And we've also seen that the monetary policies that the ECB implements might not necessarily be actually contributing to the fiscal goals that the ECB wants for all of the members of the of the Eurozone. For example, the ECB says that every country in the Eurozone should have a goal debt-to-GDP ratio of 60%. However, Slovakia is one of the few countries that actually goes below and actually accepts that goal. And so therefore we see that the monetary policies of these countries might be affecting the fiscal policies of the countries.
And while some countries may not agree with such policies, again, like Germany doesn't agree with quantitative easing because they think it'll have a moral hazard, it'll increase inflation. As George W. Bush said, in order to save capitalism, we need to betray it first. And what this means is that we need not intervening in an economic crisis by creating liquidity is equivalent to not administering CPR. It's just leaving someone to basically die. And what this means is that we know that QE, for example, is an effective way to do this, to create liquidity.
In addition to this, currently, the European Central Bank has a single mandate, meaning that they're really focused only on the stability of their currency. And by enacting a dual mandate, which is one of the plans that we want to enforce, they'll be forced to take into account both the stability of the euro and also unemployment within these various countries to help them work better with the fiscal policies that these countries are enacting.
This is a related question. We know how negative rates are supposed to work. What are the potential problems and distortions that might result as they're applied in the real world?
So one potential problem that we all know is that we could have malinvestment and as well offshoring investment. So our problem with that is that the reason we think that won't happen is because say if I was an investor, I would look at countries like Indonesia and I would think maybe if I have negative interest rates and I need to get my money out somewhere, and I might get into a place like Indonesia with where it might be better for my money to go. However, we think that this won't happen because markets are risk adverse, and they won't want to go into places like Indonesia because one, they are very connected to China where there's a lot of volatility, and two, reserve ratios are making Slovakia a very attractive option for investors because it makes their money much safer.
So even though banks might have a slightly higher interest rates in countries like Indonesia, there's much more security in the Eurozone, so that will prevent them from leaving it and prevent them from banks from leaving the Eurozone.
And looking at what's been happening so far with negative interest rates, this week the ECB said that lending has actually increased because of negative interest rates. So far they have been working out well.
Different question. On one of the slides, you had a map of Slovakia, and there was apparently a huge divide between the eastern and western parts of the country. Could you tell us why, and how would you remedy this divide?
So basically, the geography and fiscal policy of Slovakia has actually been compared on a broad basis to Germany after taking away the Berlin Wall, because the western part of it really is very urban, very educated, lots of jobs and lots of educated people, while the eastern part is more rural. It's more agriculturally motivated. We see the richest county, Bratislava, the Bratislava county, has the average wage to the minimum wage is 28%, while the poorest, Snina, their average to minimum wage is actually 60%. So we see that there is this broad change. And in addition to that, it's exacerbated because in the eastern part of the Eurozone, of Slovakia, we actually see a higher Roma population.
So part of how we can try and fix this massive divide is, first of all, with our youth, with the youth unemployment targeted mobility schemes. Those can help. Things like Youth on the Move can help get foreign young people out from other countries into Slovakia and can encourage the development of more industry in Eastern Europe, especially since they have such low unit labor costs. And additionally, with trying to improve Roma integration, that will ensure that the eastern part of Slovakia, which has such a high Roma population, will actually be educated and be able to work and provide a more booming economy in that part of the country.
So that'll in turn decrease discrimination of the Romani people if the population and the amount of places and agricultural counties and things that are moving towards the Eastern Bloc, then we can, or the Eastern Bloc, sorry. Then with the increase of stores and places and urban areas, we could have more Romani people being integrated into these places and integrated into the environment, into the economy.
To follow up on that, the Romani people have been generally in every country that they are in Europe resistant to being integrated into the prevailing governments, largely because of a history of discrimination and some have called it genocide. So what would make it different in Slovakia that would encourage the Roma there to integrate with the prevailing government?
Well, I think really the main problem is not the Roma integrating with the rest of the population, but the population integrating with the Roma. And we think that the main solution we have to this is education of the Roma. Because one of the large stereotypes, as we all know, is that they are uneducated and not working and lazy. But this is only because of the fact that that's true in these countries, and they are uneducated and they can't find a job. And so we believe that by educating them and by breaking the stereotype and by getting more Roma people and along with other people, we believe that the integration will happen naturally in that sense.
And I mean, if I was a Roma person going through everything that I've gone through, that my people, I certainly would be less, I wouldn't really have an incentive to integrate into the economy, into the government of that society. However, looking at the rates of unemployment and the rates of uneducation in these areas, it would seem seem entirely feasible for the Romani people to work towards getting integrated because of all the benefits that we tried to present in our presentation.
Exactly, and it's totally understandable that they don't want to be integrated because, I mean, in Slovakia, they only ended forced sterilization of Roma women in 2003, so it's completely understandable that they would be resistant. But by trying to boost employment throughout Slovakia and trying to get rid of extremist leaders like Marian Kotleba by making people actually happy in the country they live in so they don't have to turn to extremist politicians, that can certainly benefit and help Roma people feel more integrated and more comfortable with becoming part of the society they live in.
And we've seen with models such as Spain's Roma integration model that these models really do work. While maybe the Roma in Spain, maybe it might have been thought that in theory they themselves would not want to be part of this, we see that the incentives provided allowed them and encouraged them to receive this training to be able to contribute to the economy.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on Slovakia's national debt and whether where it is imposes any constraints on some of the economic ideas that you presented here?
Overall, it really is really good compared to most of the Eurozone and the European Union. When you look at even massively developed economies like Belgium and the United States, those economies still have debt to GDP ratios that are well over 100%. Slovakia is in an exceptionally good place with having their debt to GDP ratio be below the 60% benchmark. And they certainly have room to spend money on these fiscal programs. And with combating tax VAT fraud, which in the United States, every dollar invested in the IRS yields $6 back in finding tax fraud and stopping it. If we see even a half of that benefit by investing in the Ministry of Finance in Slovakia, we will certainly be in a good place for spending money on fiscal programs.
And specifically, Slovakia's debt to GDP ratio compared to the 60% benchmark is 52.3%. So we can see that there is room for us to enact the fiscal policies that we do. And when we compare this to other countries in the EU, like Belgium and Greece and as well Portugal, those countries all have debt to GDP ratios that are over 100%. And so we can see that Slovakia really is doing fairly well in this regard.
But in the sense of the debt that they do have, we've observed that a lot of the mechanisms of that debt have been tied to the Eurozone and have been tied to what really has caused this sovereign debt crisis in a lot of other nations. And so that's why we believe that applying the monetary and fiscal models that we did would actually support Slovakia, because a lot of these mechanisms really are very similar.
And because it is clear that they can do this, they do have the resources and availability in their economy to enact these policies. They owe it to their people to make these changes. I mean, if I was a hardworking, highly educated citizen in Slovakia, I would be very angry with my government if I couldn't get a job, and I felt like it was my government's fault that I couldn't get a job, and in turn turn to people like Marian Kotleba, very radical people like that.
So just to follow up on this issue, in the current political constellation in Slovakia, does it make it easier? Oh, sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.